Another day, another Palestinian journalist murdered. For almost 2 years, Israeli bombs have been raining down on Palestinian homes, residential towers, schools, and hospitals. High-tech US weaponry has relentlessly pummeled refugee camps within refugee camps. Israel has killed at least 20,000 children since the genocide began. To put this into context, one child has been killed every 45 minutes. Now, even as all of this has played out in front of our eyes, the mainstream media's coverage of the genocide has remained abysmal and by and large deplorable. Large swaths of the press have fallen into a cesspool of what Palestinian writer Muhammad al-Kurd describes as a volley of, quote, war crime denialism, state stenography, fact omission, fabrication, passive voice, and the deliberate undermining of Palestinian interviewees. But over and above the twisted mainstream coverage of the genocide, an extermination of a different type, possibly one that we have never seen before, is playing out too. Namely, a deliberate effort to eliminate Palestinian journalists. Over the past 600 days, around 250 journalists have been murdered by Israel. While some were massacred along with their families, many others were assassinated as they worked. Who can forget how Ismail al-Ghul was decapitated in an Israeli airstrike as he covered a story in Al-Shati refugee camp? Who can forget the calamity faced by Al Jazeera's Wael Daoud, who lost his family while out in the field? Or the case of Muhammad Abu Hasira of Wafa news agency, who was killed along with 42 of his family members while they slept? Or Anas al-Sharif, along with his 5 colleagues, assassinated in a tent housing journalists? Now, between a handful of articles, crocodile tears from a correspondent or two, and half-hearted petitions, the killings have barely registered a complaint from the majority of journalists operating in the mainstream. Instead of condemning their murders over the past 22 months, they cried out instead, "Allow us in, allow us to tell the story." The lack of care, concern, and frankly outrage over the murder of Palestinian journalists is tied to the dehumanization of the Palestinian question that has dogged this industry for decades. As key interlocutors of the liberal order, journalists are known to jealously guard their freedom of speech. The ability to report, ask questions, speak up against the powerful, and then return home safely are the rights that Western journalists expect to be entitled to. Not so, however, when it comes to black or brown journalists operating in faraway places where if something bad happens, who is to say if they actually didn't deserve it? For those of us who work with Palestinian journalists and have a small window into the many hurdles they must overcome just to do their jobs, be it the control of their movement, the threats from the army, the accusation of bias from editors, not to say anything about the never-ending charge of anti-Semitism from the Israeli lobby, there are no words to describe the contempt that Western journalists have shown to our colleagues in Gaza. And much of this has to do with racism and parochialism. It is the same media that beat the drums of war ahead of the invasions of Afghanistan and the Iraq War. It is the same media that amplified Islamophobia during the so-called global war on terror. It is the same media that mischaracterized the devastating Israeli wars on Gaza between 2008 and 2014. It is the same media that undermined the Great March of Return protests between 2018 and 2019. It is the same media that distorted the truth about the killing of Shirin Abu Akleh in 2021. And it is the same media who ceremoniously underwrote this ongoing genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Just as Joe Biden didn't need to see the photos of beheaded babies to believe they existed, the mainstream media has felt entitled enough to suspend belief in Palestinian testimony, be it man, woman, child, fighter, doctor, teacher, preacher, or journalist, be it in-house or on the ground, until they verify it themselves. And this is the crux of it. Most Western journalists don't consider Palestinian journalists to be real journalists, because it follows from newsrooms who don't believe Palestinians are full human beings, because it follows from the leaders who refuse to accept that Palestinians have the right to self-determine. To the Western eye, Palestinians are still the perennial savage, until and unless vetted by Western civilization. The slanted coverage, the heinous dehumanization of Palestinian life and their rights is therefore inseparable from the colonialism that still continues to this day. It is also tied to the long-time predatory practices of Western journalists who see themselves as trained and professional and locals as occasional fixers and disposable sound bites. Western mainstream media is a microcosm of the supremacist worldview, and it's time to treat it as such.